being a great way to save money. Why don't more people live with their parents? I moved back in with them for 6 months last year after being gone and on my own for 12 years. It was hell. Where are you going? What time will you be back? Do you have plans today? Why are you sleeping in until 10 a.m. on a Saturday? After I work 60 hours, endless meaningless questions. Sure, I saved money, but it was awful. I will never do it again. I'm 30. If I want to smoke a joint, I don't want to have someone say again, or ask if I'm gonna be home for dinner. Independence is really a gift. It's just not conducive to a good mental state after being in your own for so long. My parents lost their houses, including the one I grew up in the run-up to the 2008 financial housing crisis. My mum lives with her sister now. I haven't had the option of move back in with your parents for a while since I moved out when I was 18. I've been doing this whole living thing without a net lol. Don't live in the same city they do. And I'd have to get a much worse lower paying job to move there. There are no good jobs where they live unless you're a real estate agent, lawyer, or doctor. Social stigma. Our 20s South should be for going out late on a weeknight, making all the mistakes, one night stands with a girl you met at the club, all while subsisting on 40-cent ramen packets and dollar draft specials. I lived at home for the bulk of that decade and missed out on all that. I turned out just fine. A little less experienced in some ways, but nothing I have long-lasting FOMO about. I'm trying to make up for lost time with a slightly more sophisticated take that a late 30s person can afford. I was pretty salty about my situation in my 20s, however. I briefly moved back in with my parents after college graduation, while searching for jobs in my field. Got one about 3 months later, and then moved out 6 months after. 2 reasons: ready to move I with long-term GF now wife, and the 1.5 hours each way commute in traffic was a fucking killer. Even if I didn't have a GF, I would have moved out ASAP because the drive was terrible. My parent lived kinda out in the boonies, but would have stayed much longer if it was a reasonable commute. They didn't care how long I stayed, and obviously I would have saved a ton of money. Well, for some of us it's extremely detrimental for our mental health. Hip with my family. Due to the consequences of past trauma, I can only take about 2.5 days of constantly being with them before I start to burn out emotionally and dissociate extremely heavily. This all means that despite early scraping by at times, it's ultimately worth it not living with family solely for my mental health. Also recently I moved 900 kilometers away from my family to a different city because of study options and my long-term career plan. Alongside everything already mentioned, not everyone is so fortunate to even have living parents. My dad died when I was in my 20s, and my mum lives with her new partner in a tiny home. I couldn't burden her with my presence. There's nowhere for me to go even if I wanted to. Now in my 30s, and believe me, as much as I love my independence, I'd kill to have a few years to save on rent and not feel like I'm drowning. If your parents are alive, and you have that safety net option of being able to move home, cherish it. Not everyone gets that. In America, there was a culture of rebellion and ultimately independence that created hostility between generations, and not only a gap in an economical sense, but a gap in the family dynamic expected. Lots of reasons. I don't want to be a burden on my parents. My relationship with my parents has become far stronger since moving out. I want to build a space of my own. I get a sense of purpose from taking full responsibility of my own well-being. Social stigma. As a guy in the US, you are seen as a sort of failure if you are of working age and still living with your parents. Good luck dating as well. There used to be a social stigma on this, but due to the current housing crisis in much of the Western world, it's become more socially acceptable. For people with an Islamic background, it was already more socially acceptable to live with your parents if you are single. I have plenty of Muslim co-workers who are at a junior level. They're able to drive some really sick cars because they don't have housing expenses. Because I like living life on my own terms, and I live in a downtown urban environment, and my parents live in the woods hundreds miles away. I like having all my own things and my own space too. Plus, I'm 40 years old. Someone I've known a really long time from my hometown still lives with their parents, and they barely can take care of themselves. And I think that contributes to it. Being an adult and give you the freedom, and that you have no desire to have friends over at night cause you can't really have 5 friends just chilling in the living room and not wake up your parents. Those are a lot of ifs. Used at 18 and suddenly had to come back in 2020 and was there for 2 months before I moved out again because of the continuing abuse, and I came back again at 2023 for 2 months and moved back out again. This time, I have a house that I'm not gonna lose and a good position in life. I won't end up back at my parents'. Social stigma, and it really can be very difficult, emotionally, to live with your parents as an adult. However, I do think people don't appreciate what a privilege it is to even have the option to be able to live with you parents. There are many people whose parents really are either too awful or too poor to make this work. Because it's their house. Privacy can come in super late and not piss them off or have them questioning you. Unattractive to quality opposite sex. Missed benefits depending on personality of parents. Really, the only cons are it costs you more money to not live with them. And they are on their own schedules, they do their own thing, they do prioritize you and what you want, and while as an adult this isn't required, it can be annoying to fit your life within someone else's. I did come back to my parents' house at 23 after a few years in an apartment where I hit rock bottom. The first year was good. I was working full-time and got back in shape. The second and third year were hell on earth. We argued more than when I was a teenager, and it ended up with me not speaking to my dad for weeks. Many parents cannot accept the fact that their children are free-thinking adults, for better or worse. So they continue to try and direct their lives as though they were still children. For those that can see their adult progeny as roommates, the living together arrangements seem to be more common and stable. I have always lived with my parents when I lived in the same city as them. I just haven't lived in the same city as them since I was 22, and 22 was part-time half the time. I was at university in a different city, and then I moved country, which means the hypothetical commute would be even worse. Independence. I was a college graduate at 21 with a stable job, lived with my parents because that is the norm in my country, and gave them money every payday. They still managed to slut-shame me when I went to a vacation with my then fiancé. No. FCK that. I didn't want to, and my mum never even hinted of offering. Instead, I lived in my car for a few weeks before I was offered a room at a friend's house for a couple of months. I didn't ask to live with her because she sucks. She didn't offer because she sucks. Both my partner and I live with our respective parents, and we each own a house. It has more to do with taking care of our parents, but I won't deny it helps finances. Having a partner who lives a similar life is amazing and removes a lot of stress. I did, for about 2 years after graduating undergrad. It allowed me to buy a car and make a big bite out of the loan. And it allowed me to save up some money and travel. But 2 years was the limit for me. My dad was difficult, to say the least. In my case, my industry is location dependent, and there was not an option to do what I do where my parents live. I'd love to live closer, but realistically it will require me to change fields, which is a longer-term plan. But not happening now. I never had the option. I know few people who make great money and still live with their parents in their 30s. I don't knock them, but damn, what an advantage. I wish I had parents that didn't have the kick them out at 18 mentality. Multiple reasons for me, but mostly my parents are monsters. Currently, they are getting their karma punch, and my dad is in prison and my mom is on the edge of being committed. So no room for any of their children to stay with them. Parents, yes. Father, mother and brothers are my family, but not that thing that man is still a child and only enjoy the life without doing anything for us. My poor mother and older brother were his second parents. It was traumatizing the first time. Whenever I'm around them, I feel myself losing 10 years of personal growth. And I just revert back to feeling like a scared little kid. I sometimes get the feeling my mum preferred me that way. Moved back in 2 years ago. Spent a few years living with friends of mine that were a couple. They bought a house with her parents and I couldn't afford the whole house to myself. So basically we're all back with our parents, lol. Social stigma. In the US, my parents were nothing but a burden. It would have cost us financially to live with them, as they were irresponsible and childish. My spouses are holders. So just a few possibilities. Sometimes, people have very strained relationships with their parents. If it's a choice between ruining your mental health by staying in the family home or saving money, I would say to definitely move out. I left my pa's home at 17. It was important to me to be able to smoke weed whenever I wanted, to play my guitar very, very loudly whenever I wanted, and to have as much loud raucous sex as I could get. To answer for my own kids, quite frankly, our home is too small and we just simply can't afford to keep supporting ourselves plus to full-grown adults. Life is expensive for the parents too, because they want to strike out on their own, being independent adults and having the time of their lives, without being under the judgmental and prying eyes of mommy and daddy. I have never understood why in American culture the son or daughter is kicked out at 18 before they even have a job. This causes them to struggle a lot and live paycheck to paycheck.